In 2025, global temperatures reached 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. 5 years later, the inevitable rise brought it to 1.7 degrees. The IPCC called that figure an existential danger threshold, yet instead of a changing course, what followed was a shift in narrative. The language of reports softened. The word crisis was replaced with transition. The word emergency was masked as an adaptation. But the hard facts continued to rot inside the data. In Niger, the soil could no longer be farmed. Its acidity had increased by 40% in just 1 decade. In Bangladesh, floods arrived 3 months earlier than usual, drowning rice fields that hadn't even been planted yet. In Canada, the boreal forests that once absorbed carbon now became emission sources, burning throughout the summer. No question loomed larger than this. If the Earth has become its own enemy, what does development even mean? The United Nations Environment Program report of 2029 stated bluntly, at the current pace of mitigation, the world will never reach net zero by 2050. Not even close. A net emission gap report, 2029, what it didn't say was who stood in the way. The same countries that pledged allegiance to the Paris Agreement were also the ones quietly signing oil and gas exploration contracts in the Arctic. Global fossil fuel investments reached $1.2 trillion in 2028, surpassing even pre-pandemic levels. This truth is no longer hidden, only ignored. The world now divides its time between busyness and indifference. Yet, something subtler emerged. Technology, we created a connected world, but that connectivity is controlled by the unseen. Data became the most valuable currency, and with it came a new form of power. The rule of algorithms was never declared, it was gradually deployed. Leaders aren't chosen through debates, but through your interactions with a screen. Artificial intelligence reads your eating habits, then recommends national food policy. Is this efficiency, or a new form of surveillance? By 2026, 78% of urban dwellers no longer knew where their food came from. Food was produced in biotech factories, not farms. Meat came from labs, and vegetables from vertical farms owned by the same companies that engineer genetic pesticides. Human hands no longer touched soil. They merely supervised LED panels. Yet ironically, over 800 million people remained hungry, the highest number in 2 decades. We built smart cities, but forgot that cities are not just systems. Cities are people, and people cannot be shaped by algorithms. Abu Dhabi transformed parts of its desert into temperature-controlled housing zones, but only 12% of them were occupied. The rest stood empty, like projects built for a future that never came. Is this an advanced civilization, or one merely skilled at fabricating the illusion of progress? Then came water. Water is the new silent conflict. The Mekong River is controlled upstream by dams built by China. The Amazon has lost 17% of its forests, and scientists warn that losing 20% would turn it into savanna. Yet deforestation continues not by local communities, but by investments disguised as sustainable development. Groundwater in northern India drops 3 meters every year. The cotton in global t-shirts shrinks from the future. In 2029, the WHO stated that more than half the world's population experiences chronic water stress, yet there is no panic. Why? Because crises no longer strike everyone at once, only fragments. And in this age, the suffering of a few is no longer enough to trigger collective action. A small segment of humanity lives in enclosed complexes with filtered air, purified water, and personalized meals. The rest fight through dust and empty stomachs. The gap is no longer economic but existential. And then comes the question that cannot be escaped. What if we already know everything, but choose to do nothing? We were never without warnings. Greta Thunberg stood on global stages and called world leaders traitors of the future. Report after report pleaded for attention. But the world is not run by warnings, it is run by profit. And profit knows no future. Now, we stand at the threshold of 2030. The year once envisioned as the finish line of global development goals. The flagship year of the Sustainable Development Goals. Yet of the 17 major goals, only 2 are even close to being achieved, and even that is due to manipulated statistics. False progress is the most elegant form of escape from failure. So now the question is no longer, what can we do? But rather, do we truly want to change? Or do we just want to feel blameless? 2030 is not the end. But for the first time in modern history, the world is asking, what happens if we can no longer repair the future? And to that, are you ready? On the surface, the world appears to be healing. Global carbon emission numbers have reportedly begun to decline slowly since 2026. Nations release press statements, citing historic reductions and significant strides toward climate targets. At international conferences, downward-sloping blue graphs are shown, and leaders smile before the cameras. But graphs do not show casualties, they only show trends. The drop did not result from a fundamental shift in global production, but from brutal reality. Much of the world has already degraded too far to produce as it once did. Agricultural yields have fallen due to dead soil. Energy consumption is down because densely populated regions in South Asia and Africa have become uninhabitable during the summer. Mass migration has caused cities to collapse and factories to be abandoned. We called it a transition to the green economy. But who benefits? Behind the decline in emissions hides a truth left unspoken, that the world was forced to stop not by choice, but by a collapse that could no longer be postponed. As old industries withered, new ones emerged with a cleaner face but not a fairer one. Renewable energy became the new economic power, but distribution was far from equal. Over 60% of the world's solar panels are manufactured and controlled by just four multinational companies. The lithium batteries powering global electric vehicles come from Bolivia and the Congo, extracted by underpaid laborers with minimal safety gear. Amnesty International stated in its 2028 report, clean energy built on suffering is no different from dirty energy. It simply smells better. Amnesty Report on Energy Extraction Ethics 2028, and that is the face of the world in 2030. Greener from afar, but up close, the wounds remain open. Water has become the quietest yet deadliest commodity. In some regions, it is no longer a right but a subscription service. Water infrastructure companies sell clean access on tiered systems. Different prices for different economic castes. In Nairobi, the poor pay 5 times more per liter than the wealthy living in tech districts. In California, a smart water grid allows elite homes to regulate personal water quotas, while small farms lose access during peak drought. New conflicts don't erupt as wars, but as seizures disguised as innovation. Meanwhile, the oceans slowly become open graves. Rising sea temperatures have killed vast quantities of plankton. Marine food chains collapse from the bottom up. Fish populations plummet, yet global protein demand soars, prompting artificial sea farming that relies on antibiotics and genetic engineering. We call it sustainability, but in truth, it is an ecosystem operated like a factory. In the end, what breaks is not just the environment but the very meaning of sustainability itself. Now the world stands between two paradigms. One continues exploitation with a new, smarter, but still controlled by the few. The other is a path yet to be defined, not just a technological transition, but a reshaping of how we understand life, progress, and responsibility. Yet the deepest question remains unchanged. Does the world truly wish to change, or only to appear as though it has? If all we do is swap one form of power for another, are we truly advancing? Or are we simply beautifying our path toward collapse? No one denies the world has become smarter. Artificial intelligence has infiltrated nearly every aspect of life. Homes regulate human body temperature, vehicles move without drivers, disease diagnoses are handled by neural systems that analyze billions of medical records in seconds. Children learn from algorithms that know their cognitive weaknesses better than their teachers. On the surface, this is a revolution. But revolutions do not always mean liberation. Sometimes, they are a new form of dominance wrapped in wonder. In 2027, the World Economic Forum reported that 63% of global administrative jobs have been replaced by automation. In advanced cities, human faces are slowly replaced by screens, sensors, and machine decisions. In cities left behind, humans still work only now to sustain digital infrastructures they never benefit from. There is a sharp contrast between creators and users. AI systems are trained on data from around the world, but are controlled by a few corporations who decide who may access, who can purchase, and who is left watching from outside the gates. What's called democratization of technology is not democracy, it's standardization. People don't choose technology. Technology chooses who is worthy to exist within its system. Citizens without sufficient data histories are labeled high risk by credit algorithms. Children from poor communities are classified as low potential learners by automated education evaluation. Even job opportunities are now filtered by biometric compatibility and digital personality profiles. It all seems objective, but no algorithm is free from the bias of its origin. A 2028 MIT study revealed that facial recognition systems fail to identify dark-skinned women with more than 70% accuracy. For such systems, some people become invisible, and in a world governed by visual recognition, to be unseen is to be unacknowledged. We built a smart civilization, but this civilization was not built for everyone. Satellite internet connects the Amazon rainforest to Tokyo, but who controls the data traffic? Who filters information? Who defines the narrative? In the haze of endless data, truth becomes elastic. Every fact can be twisted. Every history can be rewritten by a system powerful enough. In the past 5 years, over 60% of the digital population cannot distinguish between human and machine-generated content. Reality has become a product, no longer something we experience, but something served based on our profile. In this shadow, a new class has emerged, the invisible class. Those without digital identities, not recorded in health systems, without biometric credit, barred from autonomous transport for lacking verification tokens. They are not criminals. They are merely incompatible with a world that defines existence through data, not because they rejected progress but because progress rejected them. Thus arises a new form of exclusion: no walls, no weapons, no explicit bans. But unmistakable, you're not in the system. Therefore, you do not exist. Smart cities form invisible layers. Elite districts are programmed to deny entry to individuals below a minimum social index. Restaurants, hospitals, even places of worship require digital identity verification. Everything runs efficiently. But everything also runs on the assumption that everyone can and wants to join the system. The question is, what happens to those who can't? In West Africa, millions of climate refugees lack digital documentation. They become shadows in megacities run by algorithms. In South America, indigenous communities lose their lands because automated mapping systems marked their territories as idle land. In Southeast Asia, undocumented workers can't access disaster relief even when their homes are directly hit. Technology is not evil, but technology is not neutral. It reflects the values of its creators, and when those values are shaped by profit, efficiency, and control, the world it builds will exclude those who aren't profitable. We call this a smart civilization. But what is intelligence without compassion? If the future is a closed system, accessible only by fingerprint, digital ID, and consumption history, are we still human or just users? So let us ask ourselves today, before it is too late, are we creating a better world or just a more advanced world for the few? The world is no longer divided by walls, but by infrastructure. No longer conquered by bullets, but by scarcity. No longer controlled by states, but by ecosystems. This is the new face of geopolitics. Power hidden in energy supply chains, in logistics networks, in data ownership. Between 2026 and 2029, lithium prices surged by 280%, not because the mines disappeared, but because the hands controlling distribution shifted. Lithium, nickel, cobalt, the fuels of a zero-emission future are no longer just commodities. They are weapons. Nations once dismissed as the third world are now the new centers of gravity. The Democratic Republic of Congo, Bolivia, Kazakhstan, once skimmed over on maps, have become trump cards in the global game. But that power doesn't always reach their people. Instead of conventional wars, these years saw the rise of a new model of dominance. Corporations stronger than governments, behind names like Green Earth Logistics, Coracharge Alliance, and Novogrid Consortium like global pacts never approved by any parliament, yet more impactful than in Security Council resolutions. A 2028 report by the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute recorded that 41% of armed conflicts were no longer funded or directed by states, but by energy consortiums, tech firms, and transnational investors. Conflict no longer looks like war, it looks like bankruptcy. Like mass migration, like power outages during winter, because this is the new war. Control one node of distribution, and you can paralyze thousands of cities. Undersea cables are now more critical than military bases. Communication satellites more decisive than generals, and those who control cloud computing can determine a nation's economic fate with a single click. No gunfire, no bodies on the streets, yet more casualties. The state is no longer the world's dominant actor. By 2029, 7 out of the 10 largest economic entities were not countries, but corporations. And corporations are not bound by constitutions. They have no citizens, only shareholders. The question is, if power shifts hands, where does accountability go? When a high-speed rail in Central Asia halts due to a dispute between 2 cloud vendors, who takes responsibility? When food prices in East Africa spike because a corporate soil sensor misread weather patterns, who is to blame? The world keeps moving, but its gears can no longer be summoned to negotiation tables. This is a faceless world, where contracts are stronger than law, and networks stronger than national borders. Water trades between Indian and Chinese provinces are now governed by smart contracts that even presidents cannot revoke. The global food system is determined by carbon indices, no longer by seasons. International labor markets are shaped more by digital reputation rankings than university degrees, and all of it runs with precision. But not for everyone. Hundreds of millions with no digital access have no say in these mechanisms. They're unrecorded, unfactored in algorithms, and ultimately excluded from the world being built. Even as they suffer most directly from droughts, famines, and bankruptcies, they remain invisible within the system. That is the danger of power without a face. It cannot be held accountable. It cannot be overthrown by elections. It can only be complied with or left behind, and those left behind do not return to history. So here we are, in a world where satellite owners wield more influence than tank commanders, where minor logistic disruptions spark food crises in 5 countries, where those who control infrastructure control the future without waging war, not because the world has found peace, but because war has evolved. Now we must ask, if power no longer wears a flag, who must this world answer to? From afar, the world appears prosperous. Growth charts bend upward. Reports from the IMF, World Bank, and McKinsey speak of post-climate crisis recovery, supply chain efficiency, and the rise of precision agriculture. But numbers do not reflect hunger. They only reflect a system that has learned how to hide it. Between 2025 and 2030, the number of people statistically not hungry increased, but biologically, their bodies no longer received enough nutrients to sustain long-term health. This is not about not eating. It's about eating but not enough to truly live. This is the age of invisible hunger, synthetic rice, fermented protein, calories from programmed algae. The world produces more food than ever before, yet less of it can truly be called food. Food engineering has become the art of manipulating statistics. Meals are no longer made for humans, but for indicators. Low carbon, low water use, low logistical cost. In global food data centers, algorithms decide what to plant more than farmers do. Most people don't realize they're losing flavor. They've been normalized to food that's chemically sterile and emotionally void. Bread that is always soft, but never fragrant. Meat that never lived, but never really died either. The world is losing its memory of food, and when memory fades, so does the courage to question. A new paradox emerges. Hunger statistics fall, but hunger itself grows, unseen, unheard, but felt in bodies that fall illicitly, in children growing without energy, in communities losing the ritual of shared meals. No spreadsheet can quantify that loss because it is not recorded in data, it is etched in the human body. A small global elite still accesses real food. Tomatoes from soil, fish from the sea, fruit from trees, but for billions, food now comes from 3D printers, biomass factories, and nutrient computations. Food becomes data, not experience. And when food is data, flavor is no longer required. International food organizations tried to resist, but they were outmatched by patents. Over 62% of the global food system is now controlled by 6 companies that hold proprietary rights to distribution algorithms, logistics infrastructure, and genetically engineered seeds. What does food sovereignty mean in a world where harvests are not determined by soil, but by API access to servers? More critically, food security is no longer about availability, but about access to digital and logistical systems. You can grow vegetables, but if the AI system doesn't register them in its regional inventory, your produce doesn't exist. Unlisted food is lost food, and the lost is unsold. In this way, hunger is no longer caused by crop failure, but by data failure. People go hungry not because food is absent, but because the system doesn't recognize them as entities to be fed. By 2029, the number of children with digital stunting increased not because they lacked physical food, but because the digital food system deprioritized their regions. They live in the shadows of logistical maps too small for drones to see, too poor for consumption models to consider. And that is the new face of hunger. Not crime, but ignored statistics. Not drought, but invisible thresholds engineered by economic systems. Now we must ask, if the world believes everyone is full, do we still have the right to feel hungry? Education was once designed to shape thinking humans. Now it is built to shape humans accepted by the system. Between 2025 and 2030, educational institutions changed not because of curriculum revolutions, but because of shifts in what is called market demand. But the market itself is no longer made up of people or communities. It is systems, networks, and algorithms. So education changed to not to understand the world, but to be mapped by it. Children no longer learn to know. They learn to be recognized. They are no longer students, they are data entities. Every assignment, every test, every answer is evaluated not by teachers, but by AI systems that generate behavioral profiles, cognitive patterns, emotional tendencies. The classroom is no longer a place of learning, but a data gathering center, and data outweighs test scores. Degrees are no longer the goal. Algorithmic trust indexes are everything. A graduation is meaningless without a high enough trust score to unlock access to digital labor markets. The world no longer seeks the smart but the predictable. In this system, curiosity is deviation, because the more you ask questions irrelevant to the system, the harder it is for your profile to match the standard model. So silence becomes virtue, compliance becomes skill, innovation. Only within sandbox limits. Universities shift roles, no longer towers of knowledge. They become talent incubators geared to convert students into productive cloud-based entities. Students are assessed not for comprehension, but for compatibility with productivity prediction models. Philosophical questions are inefficient, and what is inefficient is discarded. Those who survive are the ones who adapt to machines. Between 2026 and 2028, over 30 million students across Asia and Africa lost access to higher education not because they lacked capability, but because they were incompatible with predictive learning models. They didn't fail to learn. They failed to be read, and that failure went unnoticed. No headlines, no protests, no outrage, only shifting numbers. Education became a silent sorting ground not for knowledge, but for legibility. Meanwhile, in elite educational centers, a new form of learning emerged: anti-algorithmic education. Children from the highest access families were taught to think freely. They hand-wrote essays, debated without filters, read poetry, argued, asked endlessly, because the elite know what public schools do not teach. The future of power lies not in working within systems but in creating new ones. The world divided not by education quality, but by its purpose. One side was shaped to submit, The other was trained to rule. And that divide keeps growing. When education no longer liberates but conforms, it ceases to serve its true purpose. Schools stop creating thinkers. They produce components. And in such a world, questions become the most dangerous thing of all. Now we must ask, if learning no longer sets us free, can we still call it education? Come on, subscribe for videos about other interesting world facts.